G'day and welcome to David Joshua Ford, episode 59. We're going live here today to talk about presenting and producing, how you're going to run a show as well as present it. If you're in here last week, you would have seen Jules Apatini, my good friend from Uptown, came down on 6 Train and we were able to hear about his life story. So we're going to look at how we did that show last week, which was presenting and producing at the same time. And it really involves a clicker and companion and a couple other things. So we're going to go through that. But if you are here in the chat, drop a line and say hello. We've got a couple of people on today's show. IT Never Gets Old. Great to have you here. Ray Johnson from East Tennessee, welcome. And Eric, thanks for dropping a line to say hi from upstate New York, because yes, today is looking really hot. So staying inside is a good place to be here in some air conditioning in the studio. But if you have any questions as we go along about live photography, live streaming, all that kind of stuff, do drop that in the chat and we can answer those questions. I cover here a lot of companion in terms of how to bring a whole show together and automate things. Canon PTZ cameras is what I'm using for these cameras to run the show and the automations for the moves. And what else do we do? ATEMs, Canon stuff with the stills cameras and all that kind of stuff. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. But otherwise, let's kick off with taking a look at presenting and producing. So the idea here is, how are you going to run a show like this? So you got lights, camera, sound, encoding, going out to live streaming, maybe chat, all of that while you're presenting, and you don't want to be on a computer and having to look at things. And then, as I demonstrated in last week's show, you might actually want to have a guest in the studio and actually be away from all of this computing stuff. And I've been able to create a profile that boils down to running a show with a clicker. And this is just a Logitech. Let me see if I can bring this one up here. Is a Logitech R500. It's, I think, about $39. It's very basic. I'm not going to click any. Oh, the buttons aren't connected, so I could probably click them. But we've got a little laser here. So a laser pointer, a forward button, and a back button. And then there's 2 additional things you can program in there, which is a long press on the forward and the back. So essentially, we're working with a very basic remote with 4 buttons, and we're going to look at how we get this remote to speak to companion, so then we can determine what functions we want it to roll, to execute when we either press or long press these buttons. There are other remotes on the market. There's the R500, and then there's the sort of really expensive one, which is about $100 for the Logitech presentation remote, which has a few more gesture controls, and you can, if you're presenting a PowerPoint, you can zoom in sections of your screen. But I actually really like this one because the ergonomics of it are really good. So it sits in your hand very well, so that just is, you don't have to think about where you're putting your thumb. Some of these other remotes have very small buttons close together on either side. And so that's where it's just harder to work out. Like if you're presenting, then you don't want to be glancing down to sort of be like, wait, am I pressing the right button here? So not even looking at the remote, I can just, with my thumb, I can feel where that main button is to click to advance things. And then just below that is my back button, which we're going to program. So I don't have the video loaded up from last week, but it is just the last episode on the channel. So if you want to go and look at last week's episode, you'll see what that looks like in terms of running a show in here. We had Jules sitting here and I was sitting here, and I had basically a 3-camera setup. So I had a 2 shot from the front, and then I had PTZs on either side, and we were cross shooting to get singles. And then with the remote, with this little clicker, I was able to choose whether I want to cut back and forth or to load in various presets. So that's how I went around with that. Let's start by looking at the Logitech remote. So if we go in here, you're going to pull up Logitech R500, and it's under here. This is the one that I'm talking about, R500 presentation remote. And somewhere down here, if you go support, downloads, somewhere in there is your presentation, Logitech presentation. So this is the software here. So you can see I'm running Mac, but there's also available for Windows. And you would basically download that and install it. And Logitech. And it is going to open up an application in your application folder. So I'll bring that up for you so you can see what I'm doing here. So if I go Logitech, basically like this. So in my application folder is going to be this application Logitech presentation. And if I click that, that is going to basically open up here, and that is how we're connecting to the remote. Now, the nice thing about this is it's very easy to pair. So it has Bluetooth inside of it. I found the Bluetooth a little bit patchy, like it doesn't seem to always remember the device. But theoretically, this has Bluetooth in it, and so you don't need anything else, and you could just connect it to a computer via Bluetooth. But even easier than that, as long as you have the connections, is in the back end of this is going to be a regular USB-A Bluetooth wireless receiver, and it's kind of shortcuts any setup because basically as soon as you plug this in, it's going to pair up. You may want to, depending on your computer, if you're running USB-C, you may want to get an adapter. So this is what I would plug that into there in terms of being able to get into my MacBook. But if you have a hub or like a dock, then you can plug this straight into that. So this is what I'm going to plug into my computer. And there is one caveat here, which is when I'm running, I'm showing you on my main computer just because it's easier to, in terms of what I've got set up here. But for, let's go here. If we go out to my desk, let's go really wide to my desk here. So it's my main computer that I'm demonstrating on here, but I actually have, it's going to be running on another computer. So one of the main things about this setup is that we need, it needs its own computer with a web page in the foreground to be able to execute the actions. So it does tie up a computer to some degree, because what we're going to be doing is under bit focus here. So under companion, under emulator, is we're going to create a surface, and I'll get to this in a bit. And it's going to look like this. And so this is going to be an actual page within a web browser that needs to be in the foreground. And then when you click the remote, it's pressing buttons on this page. So if I navigate to a different page, then it's not going to be pressing the right buttons. It's going to be pressing these buttons. It's going to be pressing buttons 2, 3, and then 10 and 11. So these are the 4 buttons that are actually being triggered by the remote once I get up and going. So bear that in mind because it does take a computer running on your network somewhere to be able to do this, and that can be a little frustrating if you are not wanting to type a whole nother computer, but that's the way it is at the moment. All right, let's jump back to the software. So I don't have that connected, so can't show you here, but in here is where you can set the long press for the forward and the back button, and basically you would select for the back button, and then you would hit a keystroke, and they are going to be, I think it's W and E, and I'll get to that in a second. But that's where the software is. That's how it connects to the computer. I'm going to do something really weird here because when I was setting up for the show, I realized my PTZ camera that's in the rig here is probably needs to be about 180 degrees turned around because I was trying to show you a computer shot, and basically it's going to be upside down. So I didn't have time to video flip this. So maybe just turn your computer around. I won't stay on this shot for too long, but this is what I had here. So this is the computer that I'm running, and as I was saying down here, it is, where is this? I've got a, can we bring this shot in here? The dongle, here we are, the dongle is what is connected to here. So I'm going to leave this one here for the moment, and you can see what we're running. Essentially, I'm going into the same address as companion. So mine is running on .140 here, and I'm going surfaces, and I've made an emulator surface, and that is going to be bringing up on here. So if I click that, you'll see the same screen here that we were targeting. All right, let's get back to a shot that makes a little more sense, which is right side up here. What's next? So let's take a look at how we set this up in Companion. So we've set up the Logitech software, and now we need to get that to speak to Companion so that when we press these buttons, it's doing particular functions. So under disconnected, is that connected? Let me see if I've got my remote. Yeah, I do have my remote here. It was E and W, that was the connection for this one. I wish I could bring up that screen. I probably could if I jump across a screen share, but I'm not gonna do that. All right, let's go back to my weird shot here, and hopefully you will, again, upside down. So this remote is, this is connected now to there, and you can see it's bringing up R500. There is a timer if you want to make use of that. I haven't really used that yet, but then the two options here is hold next button, hold back button. So basically if I hold the next button longer than like half a second, it would execute that. And so basically you click on that, and you can either have these different actions or a custom one here. You would click here and then just press E on your keyboard to set that. So we're going to set our hold button to E and our back button to W. And there's a reason for that, which if we jump over to one that makes a little more sense, is under, let me go surfaces, and if we go to settings, it doesn't show, it used to show it on the screen and they've taken that away. I was trying to find the text. If I go down here, no. I can't remember whether there was some help info which I wanted to show, but basically on the, let me see if I can go back to my keyboard here. So the Stream Deck here can actually be controlled in an emulator, which is this. So under surfaces, we can go add emulator. So I'm going to go add emulator. It's popped a new one in here. It's given us this unique number, so we know we're always referencing it. I would call it Logitech, or just like R500, so I remember which surface I'm focusing on here. We go to settings, and then we need to select a page to use. It could be last page it's set up, or you could choose one in particular. Now, I was setting up my buttons for this one. If I go onto page 98, you'll see this is where I've had this. So if it's my page 1, if I go back to page 98, these are the 4 buttons that I want to press, and these are just other settings that I have on the page, but these are the 4 that I want to target. So it's going to be page 98, back over to surfaces, under settings, we're going to not use last page at startup, just in case we move elsewhere from the profile, and I'm going to drag this up to page 98, and I want to enable support for Logitech R400, and that is also enabling it for the R500, which we're sort of demonstrating here today. And basically what that does is it turns on sort of keyboard shortcuts for the emulator page. Prompt it into full screen, we don't need that, and we go close. Okay, so emulator, now I can either click here to open it, or I can click over here on emulator. I'm going to do this one, and you'll see I've got a whole bunch of surfaces that I can tap into here. Some I've called surface 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got one that I'm using for a multi-view, and then this Logitech R500 clicker was the one that I had set up previously, and then this is the one we just created, the R500. So if I click through there, now I basically have a web page where if I click on these buttons, it's going to run those actions. So if I click on this one, this is going to be a cut auto. So I'm going to cut between. So I'm clicking on just on my mouse here, and it's clicking on the web page, and I'm cutting back and forth, as you can see, between what's in my ATEM. I'm going to go in a little bit. We'll go into what's actually behind these 4 buttons here, but for the moment, you can see that if I click this button, because do I have this? So this is actually connected to the other computer, remember? But if I click this button, now I am also cutting on that page. And the reason for this is basically, I'll come back to here, and this is a very wide shot. These buttons on a Stream Deck line up with the buttons on a keyboard. Trying to think if I have something a little bit closer, maybe this shot. There we go. All right, so I can bring this in a little bit closer. So basically, from the top, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you're going to have Q to U or whatever, and so on, A to K and Z to M or something like that. So you can actually, this is a good point where if you don't have a Stream Deck, then you can actually run the whole profile using a keyboard. Obviously, the downside is that you don't have buttons that change the text in the background, so it's harder to know what you're pressing. But if you had a very basic setup and you just wanted to press a couple of buttons, that is one way to do it. And the clicker is basically doing that. It's just pressing 1 and 2 when we click here. And if we hold it down, we use that application to program it to press A and S. And so that's where over on this one, you'll see that's where it's going to target these 4 buttons that I have here. So then when we click, we can go through like this. Okay, so the next thing is, so we've got basically 4 actions that we can program into this remote now. Anything that I put into those buttons will execute once this clicker hits it. So now we've got to think about what is the way in which we want to be able to switch a show and program things and have enough forward momentum in a show that we can get it all into 4 button actions. And then the other side of this also is if you're interviewing someone like I was doing with Jules last week, it needs to be simple enough that you can maintain a conversation with someone and look at them. And I did say to Jules, like, I maybe, like, if I look off screen, I'm still listening. I'm just, I'm either like looking at the multi-view, or I have the clicker. That is going to be something that I'm trying to just like make sure the next shot is up, just to make sure I'm sort of cutting between. But this is the way that I went through this. So if I come back over to my page here, so 98, these were the buttons that we were using. So my main clicker was this button number 3, and it's one I've cut and pasted from somewhere else, but basically it's basically just an ATEM cut. So as I click, I'm cutting whatever's in my preview and my program. So let me see if I can put in, I can probably put this in here. Yeah, so my multi-view is here. And so I'm going preview to program. That's getting very confusing, isn't it? All right, let's get out of that and go back to something a little more handy. So main button is just cutting back and forth so that between a shot of like me on a close-up here and then a matching close-up, which is currently the Stream Deck at the moment, but this would be another person. So I could basically in a conversation click back and forward between it like that. So I don't have to think too much about what cameras I'm trying to pull up. It's just it's just a simple click to click back and forth. So if Jules is talking and the camera's on him, and then I was going to ask a question, that's where I would, he's talking, he's over on this shot, and then I have a question. So then I would click as I jump in and ask a question. What do you think about that? And I click and it throws back to him, which I probably needed like to set up a mannequin or something because we're just demonstrating with the Stream Deck here, which is not as doesn't look as good. But so under my super source here, that is what that forward button is doing. And then the back button I programmed to be what did I do here? Let me just make sure if I press this, it's not going to do anything crazy because this was last week's one. Okay, so this is gonna, if I click this one, this was my safety shot. So top button, clicking back and forth, and then if I click the back one, it's a safety shot. So I can sort of reset my parameters. I know that if we go back into SuperSource here, what it's doing is it's putting camera 1 into program, it's putting the PTZ into the time mode, and it's making it 2 seconds. So I'm going to very quickly get back to my next shot, and it's going to recall preset 3. And preset 3 is my standard sort of close-up here. So this shot size that we're looking at now. And so the camera is going to go back to this shot size, and it's going to put this on the line. And then I also have making sure upstream key is off. So if I was doing this one where I have this little circle is a key, and so I want to make sure if I click this one that I can get back to a full shot, and that it's not having like a repeat. Where are we? This kind of thing. Like I don't want to end up on this kind of shot where I've got a double action. More for your money. Excellent. Okay. So that's doing that, and then below this, the next one is where are we? Presets. Okay, so I've taken off the on air, and then I'm putting in PTZ2 and doing a similar thing, putting into the time mode, saying 2 seconds, so move very quickly, and I say go to preset 3, and preset 3 similarly as I had it set up was a matching close-up on Jules, and it's going to the last command here is put camera 2 into preview. So when I hit this safety shot, it's bringing me back into focus, just because I can control that. So I, as the host of a show, I want to, if your guest is coughing or something, or you got a computer screen up that's distracting, I just want to get back to a shot of me so I can speak directly to you, and that it's not, that I can sort of move the show forward onto whatever the next section is, he says, as he thinks long about what he's saying here. Okay, so that's what's bringing that into the shot, and it's also getting, in the background, it was getting that matching shot set up. So if I press this back button, and I can press it multiple times, and I know that I'm going to be in a close-up, so the next time I hit the main button, it's going to be ready to set up to sort of cut between the interview setup here back and forth. And again, this is the Stream Deck, not someone's face. But you get the idea of like, that's the reset button. All right, so there's 2 more options that we have here that we can use, which is long pressing the top button and the back button, the forward button, the back button. This is where you want to try and keep it simple, because I think as soon as you get beyond those sort of 2 actions that we just talked about, then it can get a little bit like you've got to think about, wait, which one am I triggering here? So what I programmed in the long press for the main button was it's going to press my show cue advance button, and that is down here. So if we go over here, you'll see when I press this, when I long press this, it's going to advance it to the next section. Let's take a look at what's in that button. Basically, I'm trigger pressing another button from my profile. So I have something already built elsewhere, and this is just an action saying press page 97 button 8, and then release that when I do that. And then on the feedback, just so I know what I'm looking at, there you can use the feedback, use another button style, and I've got the same 97.8 is what I have in there for just being able to sort of know what we're pressing here. So if I go to 97, or 97 button 8, go back over to 97 button 8. This is the button that I'm actually targeting, sort of tunneling through to, which is my Q advance button. So this is my cues here, and I've showed this before on the stream. So I have a pre-show, and then when we start, this button's running part 1, part 2, and then it will highlight what the next cue is going to be. So part 3 is going to be the next one, and that would trigger when I long press this. And this button here is showing what's going to be triggered next. So if I scroll down here, and this is where it gets a little complicated because obviously I've got a lot more going on here than just one button. Because if the button that other button is pressing, this one's actually pressing another button on page 5, button 7. Page 5, button 7 is this one, which is just like a very sort of back end button. And this is basically how I run my queue. It sort of goes through and checks a whole lot of variables in terms of knowing where it's up to, and then it will execute the variable that it's up to in there. So for all intents and purposes, what we've got here is it's pushing this button when I do that. So that's going to advance the next cue. So when I long press this, this is going to press part 3, which in my rundown here is going to make the camera go into a mid shot. This is my safety kind of it. So it's going to pull back to a mid shot. It's going to clear away the super source, and it's going to clear away the graphics, and it's going to bring up a graphic saying, do you have any questions and answers? So if I was presenting here and we've gotten to a point where I've like had a discussion back and forth, I'm cutting back and forth, and now I go, okay, now I want the next segment of the show. That's where I would long press, and you see that it'll bring up the next section of the show. So that triggered ATEM maneuvers, an ATEM putting it to program, camera movement, and then it cleared graphics and then put on that subject header, which was Q&A, do you have any questions? So we should say Q&A, do you have any questions at this point about what is the setup here and what is going on? If you have any questions, drop them in the chat now. I'd love to know what you thought of this, if you would use this kind of remote setup in your workflow, because the power that I see with it is that you've got 4 buttons, but you can, on the back end of that, make it trigger whatever you want. You could make it like start disks to record, you could stream somewhere, you could stop something, change camera positions. Like you can change your entire studio setup with one click. And then what I was showing in terms of the long press here, I've actually got 24 cues that I can sequentially go through. So each time I long press, it's not the same function that's taking place. It's taking the show forward into the next chapter of or the next segment of what we have. All right, so last button, you remember there was one more on here. So we're going to go to 98, R5C. And I don't have this plugged in today, so this is going to go black if I press this. But this was remember the pressing this button was a safety to bring it back to the presenter. And I think when you're designing something, you have to think about grouping physical actions together so that they have similar results, so that it sort of makes sense. So the back button for me is sort of a safety. It's like a backstop. That's how I sort of mentally think about it. So if I press it, it goes to this shot. And if I long press it, it goes to a 2 shot of Jules and me, and it also resets the single cameras for the shot on either side. So if we have a look at the button here, we are pressing input number 3. So that was my R5C, which was set up for a 2 shot. It's not plugged in today, so it's a black source. and then I'm putting on preview. I'm getting ready to cut. So this is where I'm putting camera 2 so I can have the guest ready to cut to. And then again, PTZ is in drive mode, and I'm setting PTZ2 to number 3, which was the close-up of Jules. So that's how that's operating. I'm going to press it just because, even though it's going to be black, I wish I had something in there. There we go, black, and then we bring it back to me. So that gives me sort of, in a two-person show, that gives me two setups, which is basically this button is always clicking back and forth, the main button. So that's just cutting between preview and program. And then the back button does something where it is, if I press it once, it's putting our singles into, it's putting me into program, and it's putting Jules into preview, so that I can then cut back and forth between two singles. And if I long press to bring up that 2 shot, it's put Jules into the guest into the preview in the single shot, so that the next time I'm cutting it, I'm not cutting between the singles, I'm cutting between a 2 shot and the guest. And that means you can actually sort of direct the conversation between going out to a wide shot. And I wish I had this shot set up so I could be on this shot, be like, Jules, blah, blah, blah. And today I've got Jules, and then Jules would be like, yes, blah, 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 thanks for being here. And then I'll be like, cool. And I could be over here. And then rather than cutting back to me, if I long press, I would go to my 2 shot like that. Imagine a 2 shot there. And then I could cut to go back to Jules, and he's talking. And then I can backstop to come back to me, to my single. And then I can also just cut between me and him, and then back to my 2 shot here, and to Jules, and to me. So there you go. That's why I set it up like that, because it means I can essentially cut a 3-camera show. And you could set it, obviously I've got 3 buttons that I'm using there. So I could just have like camera 1, camera 2, camera 3. That would be another way to approach it. I just quite like having the main button being cut, because it also means then as my sequence progresses and my other 24 cues that are unique, they could be putting something else into the preview, so that I could have on a particular cue, I could go, okay, now we're going to look at this video that we're going to play back, and I run the cue, and that could bring up the video and then put me into preview, so I'm ready to cut out of that. And so it just means that there's the program preview just means there's a lot more flexibility in what is actually in the preview to cut between. Yes, question here, which is a good question, very good, and I think I actually have it over here. It's not plugged in, but yes, Atiya Never Gets Old says, David, do you have a foot pedal that works in a similar fashion? Yes, I have the foot pedal here, and essentially that has what can be 6 buttons. So you've got the what's that, left, right, center, and the back side of this one. I've set this up so that under, let me see if I can put this over here somewhere. So with my cue here, I've set this up so that the right one, I wonder if I could plug that in. Let me see. I've got a cable back here. It's gonna bring this out. Okay. So USB is just plugs in here. Oh, I've got to be careful now because I could trigger something in the show. All right, so this will be the USB light. And this is not the prettiest of shots, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. The pedal, let's start by going into the, okay, and I'll show you how it works, and I'll show you how it is put together. So how did I set this up again? I think it was, I just don't want to press the goodbye button. So we're going to go back. Okay, so see down here, this part here is changing. So let me go to we'll just push right in here and we can try and get in. So hopefully you can see my thumb. This is the right side, the center, and the left that I would be pushing with my feet. But what I've got is 3 buttons up the top here, start, end, and part 3. And I've designed them this way so that this is always on the edge. So it's very easy to know where the next cue is. This is going to actually execute the next cue is. So I don't have to look down and sort of find a random button in here. I know it's just at the top edge and I can advance it. So that's how I start the show. That's how I end the show. And then these buttons are basically just picking the cue that we're up to. And every time I execute it, it automatically advances to the next one. So we were up to the goodbye part. And so with the foot pedal, these buttons correspond to the back, forward, and advance on the right side. I used to have it in the center for advancing, and I felt like with the shoes kind of get stuck in here and I would, bump something. So it was easier just to be able to have this corner button to be the advance, so the execute button, and then the middle one becomes the back, the skip, I guess, button, and then this is the back button. So if I go, I can go back here. So I'm going back through my cues. Actually, I'll bring up my cue. So you can see if I skip here. So this is basically just selecting which one I want to execute. So I can, with my pedal, go all the way to the back of the top of the show. And then I've got there's actually sort of 6 actions that you can have in here because you can also long press. So if I was here and I'm doing rehearsals and I want to go to the top of the show, this is my start. If I long press that for just a little bit, it jumps back to the top. So if I long press this, it jumps back to the top here. So I can very quickly, when I'm setting up a show with the pedal, I can do a very short long press on here, and I know at the top of the show, and then I would hit the right side to execute that. I won't do that because that would go back to the blurry shot that we see in the beginning, but I could come back to, this is a sort of safer shot, and then when I'm ready to do, let's go back to the Q&A shot. So part 3 is my Q&A. So then I press, with my foot, I press this one, and it says, Q&A, do you have any questions? And this is a great question because this is very much related in terms of remote control. And the other thing that's nice about this is that if you're in a shot, a mid-shot or whatever, you don't have to hold a clicker. And depending on how comfortable you feel with your feet, and if you're just you can sort of play like this under the desk, or if you're sitting in a chair, then you could just have that pedal there. So that's an option if you need to be hands-free, if you don't want to have hands while you're presenting. Remind me, we should look at the iPad too, because that's another way of controlling it. So that's where that would sit. And it basically has similar function to that in terms of I'm using it to advance cues. But you could also set it up however you want and just target different buttons. And yeah, let me put this one over here so I don't touch it without knowing. So let's go to what that looks like. So if you have a Stream Deck pedal, then you will plug it in and it will show up as a Stream Deck surface. So kind of like a regular Stream Deck. It'll just show up here. It's got a serial number. I've given it a name, called it pedal. And it's got settings. And it's a little bit different here than a Stream Deck because but it is targeting pages just like we did with the remote and like we do with any Stream Deck. The surface is showing a particular page from 1 to 99. So I have last page at startup. So I haven't moved this off, so that's not going to change. But what I could do is uncheck that and just have that's set to page 97. If we jump over to 97, this is, remember, where I have my cues. Too far. Where are we? Cues. So it's targeting these 3 buttons. By default, it's actually going to target the first 3. So that's where, if you're wanting to offset it, that's where you go into settings, and you would choose X offset in the grid. So you can, if you think about this one, let me see. Let me bring up, put my key on so you can see me. It's going to be, by default, it's targeting these 3, and that back, center, and forward button on the foot pedal are always going to be aligned. So it's basically a set of 3 buttons, but you can choose if you want it over here or down here or wherever you want, and you need to pick a page and then put some buttons on it. So for me, I've got page 97 is what that looks like, my cue page, and I'm using these 3 buttons. So I'm basically using the foot controller to control my cues back and forth. And so if I go back to my super source here, we will see that under the pedal settings, I've offset it 5 in the grid. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see that's where that would start, and the Y is not offset. So otherwise, it would be, down here. Button rotation. I guess you can rotate the buttons. I've never actually tried that, but I guess it would be a set of 3 that would be rotated. But that's interesting. Maybe you could do like a vertical set if you wanted to do it that way. All right, so that's the pedal. That's a great question. G'day Saul from Chicago, or Saul TV. Great to have you here on the show. The other way of controlling a show remotely, and what I did a little bit with Jules, just because when it comes to questions, you do need a little bit more than a clicker, is an iPad. And iPads are really great from being very versatile to control all of your Stream Deck functions on an iPad. So I've got my chat up here at the moment, but I can also on my iPad bring up Companion as a surface that I can click through. So I think that's connected. Maybe that's not connected. Let me see. Oh, I've got the. Let me just turn off solo. Okay. Hopefully that's better. Okay. All right, so this is where you could use an iPad to be sort of mobile, so you're not tethered by any wire for power or control, and you could go through your show and control things remotely. So I can execute all of my Stream Deck things on the iPad using the surfaces, and what else we got? So I can push into a close-up, that kind of stuff. So I can use the iPad for running the show or for advancing to the next cue. But then the other advantage is that I can bring up something like H2R, and I can actually see the comments here, and I can trigger them from here. So good morning from Chicago, and then I can clear it. So if I'm in a chat show, it means I can engage with the presenter, with the guest, and I can, say things like, IT Never Gets Sold has a great question here. What do you think? And we can execute comments and chat that kind of way. So that's really handy, and recommend iPads. It means you can walk around the studio and just sort of get to the desk. And to set that up, it's basically a surface. So you would, in Companion surfaces, you generated an emulator, give it a name. So I was on Surface 3 is what I was using here. So that has a unique page, and that's why we have different surfaces. If you've got a Stream Deck as opposed to an iPad, or if you've got 2 iPads. And then the way that you on your iPad, you basically just log into your network, into your local network, and you're going to, so I could basically log into Companion on a web page, and you can get all the same stuff here. I could go to Surfaces, and I could go to the one that I want to get, or I could just go to different surfaces so they are not getting any sort of crossover and, you know, two people trying to run the same surface at the same time. Yeah, Eric says no USB cables, which is great because obviously USB cables have a length that they can run. Not to mention, you know, they're fixed and they get in the way. So it is nice being able to do that. And the latency is not too bad. Like it's not quite as responsive as a Stream Deck, but you could switch a show using an iPad, and it's fairly. I think you saw it before in terms of this shot here. So it's like maybe like a 300 milliseconds or something. It's, you know, it's enough to do that. And then the cuts are, where are we? Are on the same shot. Let me jump around here and we go, and the cuts themselves are actually instant. So in terms of I don't see any latency for like switching a show. It's more that when you switch a page here, and I don't know if it's just because there's a lot of stuff on there, it might take, you know, 300 milliseconds or something to just switch a page, but the actual cutting is very fast, very reliable. What else do we have? I think that was it in terms of remote controls. Hopefully that is something that is helpful for you. Would you build that into your workflow? Let me know what you think in the comments, because I've found that to be very handy to be able to have that as a remote. I think the reason I was using a clicker rather than a foot pedal was there's just something about, like during an interview, was there's something about this which is just more, I don't know, it's easier to find. Like a foot pedal is still like you've got to have your feet in a certain spot. But you can certainly very discreetly use a foot pedal. Like you could be, you know, tapping away under the desk and you're not, you know, you can be hands-free, which means that if you have to handle something like an iPad, that's where that can help. All right. That is all for this week. So if you want to find out more, there's free profiles on my website. davidjoshuaford.com is where you can go to download a free profile and get an ATEM connected and some of that kind of stuff, and just sort of see how that all fits together. Really great talking with you about how to run a show, producing and presenting. We're in an age where you can do it all and you kind of have to do it all yourself. So this is an overview of how you would go about producing and presenting your whole show through a clicker or a couple of other devices, so that ideally you can focus on just being able to talk to your guest and focus on the content, and some of the tech stuff will fade to the background. Until next week, have a great weekend, and I'll see you then.